Welcome to Is Your Liver Healthy? I'm your host and Vice President at the Global Liver Institute, Jeff McIntyre. While there are so many perspectives and pathways to explore when we talk about liver health, few encompass the catch-22 that patients feel when discussing the possibility of having a transplant. The low of needing a transplant has to sit with the high of getting one and potentially having better days ahead. It's really an apt metaphor for the patient journey. And for those in need of, or those that have actually received a liver transplant, it obviously goes beyond a metaphor to a very real patient pathway. It's a medical journey, an emotional journey, and hopefully a healing journey. On this episode of Is Your Liver Healthy, we're joined by two-time liver transplant recipient Sophie Hansen and one of her doctors, Dr. Manuel Rodriguez, who is also the current president of the Society of Pediatric Liver Transplantation. This is an amazing and hopeful journey we're about to go on. Let's get started. All right, I'm happy to be joined by Dr. Manuel Rodriguez and Sophie Hansen, two folks that we are very familiar with at Global Liver Institute. And I appreciate you being here. This is an important topic that we talk a lot about, and there's a lot of different perspectives, I think, that we could attack this issue from, but none is better than hearing the voice of the patient herself, and then with her transplant doctor as well. So we're here to talk about transplant and organ donation. I want to give you all an opportunity here to introduce yourself. And in doing so, would you talk a little bit about how you introduce yourself? Talk a little bit about your relationship to liver health and liver transplantation. Sophie, why don't you start us off, if you would, please?
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. My name is Sophie Hansen. I am currently a pre-med biology student at the University of Utah. I work as a researcher in the field of transplantation, and I also am a two-time liver transplant recipient myself.
Excellent. Dr. Rodriguez.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Jeff, for having us here. This is such an important month where we have to remind everybody about donation and transplantation, and to be here with you and Sophie is really an honor. My name is Manuel Rodriguez Davalos. I'm a transplant surgeon. I do both pediatric and adult liver transplants, and I do also live donor surgery. I'm been in the field of liver transplantation for over 20 years now. You know, don't look that old, but it's been a great road, and currently I'm also the president of the Society of Pediatric Liver Transplantation, which helps me also to work with patients like Sophie and parents of children that receive transplants to kind of advocate for our adult and children that are suffering from liver disease. So it's really a pleasure to be here and to see Sophie, who's someone that we know each other almost for a decade now, and I've seen her just do so much stuff for the field that is really a privilege. Thank you for having us.
Awesome. Sophie, it is good to see you again. I think we met at our advocacy conference last year. I really want to, if you're willing to talk about kind of your experience as a transplant recipient, as a young adult. You mentioned that you have had 2 transplants. That seems extraordinary, but not unnormal, I think, at the same time. And so can you tell us a little bit about your journey there? When did you learn that you're going to need a new liver? Kind of talk us through the process that you went through there. What was your experience?
Yeah, so I was first diagnosed with primary sclerosing cholangitis and ulcerative colitis when I was 3 years old. So it's been almost 20 years now that I've been dealing with this disease. When I was first diagnosed with PSC, which is a rare liver disease, I was referred to transplant hepatology team at the Children's Hospital. And it was then that me and my family found out that I would most definitely need a transplant in the future, but because this disease is rare and kind of unpredictable, we didn't know exactly when that would be. So we kind of just took it as it came. I luckily lived a pretty normal childhood, I think in part to my support system and everything that they did to make sure I was able to still go to school and participate in sports and all of that. But when I was 11 years old, my disease started to progress further to the point where medications weren't controlling my elevated liver enzymes, and they decided that at that point it would be in my best interest to be listed on the transplant list. At that point, with PSC specifically, it's kind of hard. Your disease doesn't always reflect in the numbers that are used to calculate your score on the list. So when I was first placed on the list, I had a pretty low score, and they knew that I probably wouldn't get a transplant pretty soon. Luckily, I wasn't super sick at that point. I was pretty fatigued, but I was still able to go to school. I was a figure skater. I rock climbed. I did all the things that I would normally be able to do at that point. But as the years progressed, year after year after year, it just felt like the years kept counting up and I wasn't getting a liver. But then in 2017, Dr. Rodriguez came to the Children's Hospital, Primary Children's in Salt Lake City, and he met with me and my family. I had a lot of living donors that were in the process of being worked up, but the program at that hospital at the time wasn't set up to do living donors, so it never really got pushed through that way. So we started working up more living donors for me. But within that time, I ended up actually receiving a call for a deceased donor transplant. That was on December 31st, 2017 that I received a new liver. That liver was actually split, and I received half, and another little boy at the same center received the other half. And that's been a really cool part of my journey to be able to watch this little boy grow up healthy. It kind of is hard to reflect on yourself growing, but to see it like directly in front of me, that same liver growing and thriving is been really, really cool to see. And then luckily after I had my new liver, I recovered and was able to finish high school, graduate from high school, and just continue with life.
That's remarkable. I mean, it's really to be the rock climbing figure skater that has a liver transplant is pretty awesome. Which I know is probably the norm in Utah for teens as well. I want to ask you one more question before we go to Dr. Rodriguez, which is you mentioned about having the support to be able to go to school and to be into that sort of stuff. Can you talk about what that was? What people provided support for you and kind of guidance during that time? Was it family, friends, community? Kind of where did you find the most powerful support?
Yeah, I think it really came from all around in every aspect of my life. Of course, the thing I think of first is like my liver transplant team and the multidisciplinary team that helped get me listed and stay healthy enough to continue to do those things as much as they could. That included hepatology, NPs, PAs, nurses, nutritionists, lab technicians, everything, pharmacists. It all plays into the role of keeping patients able to do as much as they can, both before and after transplant. So in the medical setting, that was my support system. Outside of that, obviously my family was a big support during that time. And even things maybe that you wouldn't think of for adult transplant, like teachers, coaches, things like that they were really in tune to me and knew what symptoms to look out for and made sure I was safe, made sure I didn't fall on my giant spleen when I was figure skating, things like that.
That's a very attentive coach. That seems like best practices kind of generally, I think, for figure skating. And it's also a great transition to Dr. Rodriguez. And so I want, you guys have had a relationship here. Dr. Rodriguez, can you share a little bit of kind of your perspective of Sophie's journey? Was her experience typical? Were they unique challenges? What is your perspective on kind of how it happened here?
Well, I think that the age group where Sophie was when she was listed and as she was waiting for a transplant it can be a very difficult one because of the current allocation system we have. I think that Sophie kept talking about her score, and there are basically two scores that we use. One for children under 12 is called PELD, PELD, and then the MELD score, which was developed for adults, and that has changed over the years. But the original score take into account numbers that it's very important for people to know that we want to transplant. When people think about lists, they think about it's how you get yourself in line, right? And no, the system is very good because it transplants the sickest patients first. We don't have enough organs for all the patients that we need to transplant. We have over 10,000 people that need livers, and so we don't have enough. So we try to transplant the sickest patients first. Unfortunately, one of the challenges in pediatrics is that for the very very young kids, the score, although it's predictable, sometimes it's hard to get a liver the size of 1 or 2 year old baby. And then for teenagers like Sophie, that Rachel said, their MELD score, it tends to be better than the adults, and there's even a variation with gender that now we have adjusted in the latest MELD score. But I think that we see often teenagers that start to lose kind of that quality of life that Sophie had because of fatigue, because of itching, because of jaundice, the other things that come with liver disease, and they tend to wait longer, right? And that's where I think we need to think a little bit out of the box and think that one of the challenges we see in pediatric liver transplantation is size matching, right? And Sophie mentioned living donation. We didn't. When I moved to primary children's, there was no living donor transplant active, so we reactivated and started work. And like Sophie said, she had like 30 people, but it was sometimes hard to match the size. But we were able to do this type of transplant that Sophie mentioned. It's called a split. So in children, because of the size, we tend to do something called technical variant. So we can take a whole organ from a deceased donor and then divide it in two, and give a small part for a child, usually under the age of 4, although we can go older, and then the other part for a teenager or a small adult. So because we had done all the workup on Sophie for a potential live donor, when this organ came, which usually gets allocated to the smaller child, we spoke and we said, this is a fantastic organ, and it's almost like a live donor, right? It's a healthy young donor from a not very long distance from where we were, and we were able to split it. It takes a whole team. I think Sophie mentioned teamwork, and that's a key in liver transplantation, especially in pediatrics, right? Because we had, a donor team that has to go and do the splitting of the liver. Oftentimes we do it at the donor hospital. Sometimes we bring the liver back and do the splitting at the hospital. And then you have to be running 2 operating rooms and doing 2 transplants simultaneously or almost overlapping, right? So, and it was December 31st, like Sophie said. So you have New Year's, and it was, just a fantastic thing. I think that that's an important perspective for the pediatric, that the challenge is often allocation and size, right? And I think that we've made changes to make sure that there's no variation. But at some point, a few years ago, teenagers were actually one of the groups that were waiting the longest. And it's one of the most important times of your life, right? That's when you develop, Sophie has done amazing what she's doing in school and on her research. But if we hadn't had a transplant timely and she had deteriorated, then her life would have had multiple setbacks. So I think people need to know sometimes, even if your MELD or PELD are not that high, your quality of life and development is very important, and it's important to kind of use any type of organs that we may have available.
Yeah, you've already skipped ahead to my next question a little bit, but I want to flesh something out with you a little bit before we go back to Sophie, which is, the specific challenges for pediatric in this. And you referred to, size, you referred to the MELD score. As I'm thinking about this, an 11 or 12-year-old is very different than a 16-year-old. What other challenges are there for the pediatric population for this?
I think that, the variation of the diseases that we see in children are very different, right? Many of them in childhood, we have a lot of genetic and metabolic disorders that may affect not only your liver, but can affect your liver and your kidney, sometimes liver and heart. So we often have to do combined organ transplants, like do a liver and a kidney on the same patient, or a liver and a heart. So we tend to see a little bit more of those in children. And sometimes the challenge is when you have a disease that will need both organs, is can you do it simultaneously, or do you transplant the liver first and then continue the support of the kidney, or do you do a kidney? So those are very particular of our metabolic liver diseases. But I think size and access are the biggest things in pediatrics. Unfortunately, we're seeing that even in the same state, there could be difference in allocation. And a lot of times it's because of the support of the access that some people may have regarding, the type of insurance or the referral. So we often talk about the importance of also educating our primary care providers and our pediatricians about, if you have someone that you suspect that they have liver disease, or they show up to your emergency room with their eyes that look yellow or certain, to right away try to refer them to a center that can help them, because early referral is important in pediatrics.
Sophie, I want to ask about your experience with other people's experience around you, about whether people in your community or your environment, your friends group, et cetera, if they're aware of organ donation and transplant, about kind of what their view of it is. I think I've found in my conversation with liver patients that one of the frustrations is that they'll go out and they're dealing with a thing, and even something as simple as saying, "I'm tired," and then the person next to them at the grocery store is like, "Oh, I know totally what you mean." It's like, no, I don't think you do. What is your experience? Have the people around you adjusted their view on organ donation? Are they even aware of it?
Yeah, I think most people at this point are aware of organ donation, and most are supportive of it. But one of the biggest challenges is getting people to register, and also telling their family that they wish to be organ donors, because even checking the box on your driver's license doesn't guarantee that you will be an organ donor if your family doesn't know that that's what your wishes are. So one of the biggest things that I have gotten into is advocacy. Even when I didn't know what advocacy was, I ended up being an advocate for organ donation. When I was currently listed on the transplant list in junior high, I gave a presentation on the importance of organ donation. And I've had students from that class reach out and say that changed their position on organ donation when they got their driver's license.
Wow.
I've had people who adamantly told me they would never be an organ donor end up changing their mind when I told them my story. I've had tour guides from international tours make posts about organ donation after telling them. So honestly, just telling your story, I think, makes that personal connection that people don't necessarily think about until they meet someone who is alive because of an organ donor.
Right. Dr. Rodriguez, let's go back to you with a kind of a meta question here, or a geo question as well. We know that there are a lot of issues, and you talked about access and size, and that there's other with any big systems thing. There's going to be there are going to be issues that you've got to be able to troubleshoot and run through. You practice, as I understand, in both Mexico and in the United States. Are things different in Mexico for you? Are there things that we could take as, say, best practices from Mexico and think about how we could implement them here in the U.S., or vice versa? Tell me a little bit about kind of how the system might be different in Mexico.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I want to start first to give kudos to Sophie, because what her family and friends have done, with advocacy and being together in multiple walks and events to promote organ donation transplantation has been there. And you mentioned Mexico, and I proudly can say that Sophie has been part of some of these missions that we've done in Mexico, and has witnessed kind of some of the changes in the system. It's interesting because I'm originally from Mexico, although I've been practicing in the US for over 20 years, and I always had this the reason why we ended up staying was because my son has also a chronic disease that made us stay. But we always had this, my wife and I, the input to go back and help others. At some point when I was in New York, we had foundations from New York that would bring children from Mexico and Central America for their transplants. But, it's always a limited organ. And we felt that the most important thing was to go down there and help the system, train others. And part of it is doing advocacy. And I think what we've learned, and we've been down there multiple times with the teams from Utah, and now I am spending part of my time there helping programs in the larger cities, is that the allocation system is still not well established. PELD is not used universally. And I learned recently from a team from India, in countries where the system is not yet as good for allocating organs. In those countries, living donation, especially for children, is a very important part, right? So right now in Mexico, probably over 30% of the transplants in pediatrics are from live donors, because as a center, it's easier to control that part than to access. We're still trying to establish split donation, like we talked, and certain allocation things. In the US right now, our pediatric transplants come from living donors probably less than 8%, which I think is lower compared to other places. So we did a study with the International Liver Transplant Society on over 10,000 children. This was before COVID, so we have to do the next census coming up. But we followed around 10,000 children for 5 years, more than 100 transplants all over the world, with different countries, different continents, and you find difference even, as I said before, from state to state. And it has to do often with the rules of each country. Like the Europeans do a lot of splitting. Countries like Spain and Italy have a mandate that that the organs are offered first to children before adults, so they have the availability to split more. Centers in Asia, Japan, Korea, India, tend to do 80 to 90% live donors. And often it's because their allocation sister or their religious practices or other society barriers that now they're overcoming, were focused more on that. So I do think that I feel that the US has a very balanced system, because we can perform whole livers, split livers, and living donation, and that varies among time. But my view from practicing in 2 different countries and also doing some work in other countries with these groups of that do global transplant missions, I would call it, is that it depends a lot on resources and the access. And going back with what we mentioned earlier, early referral, big issues in the most common reason why we transplant children around the world is a disease called biliary atresia. And for biliary atresia, there is there's a treatment that can be successful in over 50% of children, or at least delayed transplant. but it's a surgery has to be done within the first 90 days of life. And so if you live in a remote area in, in Africa or in Mongolia, or you may not have that access to that surgery. And so part of the advocacy is also, promote around the world what we're doing in the US and what groups like the Global Liver Institute are doing, so we can create that balance, so improve the access for children.
I want to go back to a basic question for both of you, and I'm curious to hear from both of you. Sophie, will line you up first here on this. It's interesting because you, Dr. Rodriguez, you talked about some barriers that may be rooted in belief systems, et cetera. And Sophie, you referred to some of your friends that changed their mind. They would never have done an organ donation, and then made sure when they got their driver's license, they got incorporated in the system as well. What do y'all feel are some of the biggest misconceptions, or what are some misconceptions about transplant and donation that you have encountered? And Sophie, having gone through I guess both of you have gone through the process, but from different perspectives. Sophie, I'm wondering if you could talk about a little bit on that. What are some of the misconceptions that you've encountered about organ donation?
Yeah, I think one of the most common ones is that, like, if you're signed up as an organ donor and your medical team sees this and you're in like an ICU setting and you're really sick, that if your doctor or nurses see that you're an organ donor, that they won't try as hard to like save your life. The truth with that is they do not know your organ donor status, and they will not find that out until after you have like been declared brain dead. There's a complete separation. That's a complete myth. But honestly, the thing that I've encountered the most in my friend group is just the thought of them dying is kind of like I don't want to think about it. So why would I like check the box to be an organ donor? Because I'm not going to die. Like, I don't want to think about it. That's not going to happen. So I think like to those people, like, why not? Like, why not just check the box in case it's going to say it could save someone's life. It could save many people's lives. I know that death is a touchy subject for everyone, and everyone has different beliefs on it. But it happens to us all. So I think it's just good to check the box if that's something that you believe would be good.
Dr. Rodriguez, I'm curious from your provider perspective, from the physician perspective, what are some misconceptions that you run into?
Yes, thanks, Jeff. This is a very important question. I'll divide it in disease donation first, like Sophie talked, and living donation. And obviously, I agree with the 2 points that Sophie made. The other things we've seen as providers, and we've done actually some surveys about patients, is that often people, especially as we get older, we're like, oh, I wouldn't be a good donor, right? I'm overweight, or I have high blood pressure, or my mother had diabetes. Like, there's a lot of things, and the reality is we have so many people on the list that everybody can donate, and you can have a chronic liver disease and your kidneys can be completely normal, or your heart, or you can have a heart problem. And so I see this a lot. A lot of our patients may say, oh, I could never donate because, I have a problem. And the reality is that now, aside of certain maybe cancers or things that people may have that may have a risk to go to the donate organs, we have amazing organ preservation, techniques that we can make almost every organ better and usable. Even organs that may have a little bit of fat or a lot of fat, even patients that have high blood pressure, if their high blood pressure was controlled, and there may be a lot of people in their 60s, 70s that have been on dialysis for 30 years, and those kidneys would work very well for them, right? And so I think that's a challenge, that often people will judge themselves and say, oh no, I probably wouldn't be good. And the reality is that all of us can donate in a way or another. And I often say, let the experts know, and so that's, I think, from the deceased donation. From the living donation, I've seen a similar thing, that somebody would say, okay, I'm, my size, or, my son is very small and I'm big, or the other way around. I had a petite woman that did a lot of advocacy for her husband that had PSC, primary sclerosing cholangitis, like Sophie, and that was getting sicker and sicker, higher melt, and was losing that window for life donation. And she was doing so much work, and she was told at a different center that she could not be a donor because of her size. And when we met, I said, let's do your CAT scan, let's just do the measurements. And actually, her liver was perfect, and she donated around 60% of her liver to her husband. They're probably now almost 10 years out, and they're doing both really well. So
Wow.
And the other thing I've seen on live donors is that people think that you have to be related or be the same blood type, and it's not true. You can have an unrelated donor. In fact, there's been a huge role in the country of what we call non-directed altruistic or anonymous donors. We used to call altruistic, but any donor is altruistic, right? Related or not. But Sophie talked about teachers. We have so many stories about teachers, coaches, people that have actually donated part of their organs, and also being compatible. The blood type, there's different variations. So it doesn't have to be always an O to an O and a B to a B. There are things, especially for young kids, ABO incompatible donation it's very successful around the world. So those are some challenges that I think often people say, like, oh no, I can't do it. But I would say, well, it's better to say yes, like Sophie said, and then if you can't be, you can't be, right? But at least the more organs we have, the more transplants we do. And we were blessed that last year, 2024 was the year that more organs were transplanted in the United States. We did over 48,000 transplants. Wow. And that's thanks to all the people that donated and signed up. So I think it's a very important message.
So let's wrap up here with one last question for both of you as well. We'll do same order, Sophie and Dr. Rodriguez. But with final thoughts here, how would you suggest, how can people be supportive of the transplant community in your area? What are the things that you think that people would be able to do to be supportive of organ donation in the transplant community in your areas? Sophie?
I mean, obviously the first and most obvious thing is just sign up to be an organ donor and tell people about it. I wear Donate Life pins and stickers, and my car is decorated. It's everywhere. I just want to promote organ donation as much as I can. And then if you really want to get into the advocacy world, there's so many ways to do that. And you definitely don't need to be related to a patient or be a patient or be in the healthcare community. I've had people volunteer at some of like the walks and events that we do who have no connection at all. And it really is cool to see them meet these patients whose lives have been changed by organ donation. I think the organ donation community is really special because everyone you meet is so grateful because they wouldn't be alive without an organ donor. Every person I talk to is just so happy, even if there are complications, like there always are. Everyone's just so happy and grateful and humbled, and it's just such a great community to be around, that like I love bringing my friends along to walks to meet people in my group. So yeah, I don't know, get involved with your organ donation OPO to promote organ donation, get involved with GLI, go to A3, all of the things.
Excellent. Dr. Rodriguez, what are your thoughts? How can people be supportive of organ donation in the transplant community?
I think that organ donation is key to transplantation, and transplantation is growing so much. We all are touched one way or another by it. And I think people need to know that the outcomes for transplantation are really good, right? We have, children that were transplanted when they were 1 or 2 years old that they're now in their 30s, 40s. I mean, we have this amazing example of Sophie with us. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's very important to share with our community that importance, and that transplant recipients do really well. And there's something I was looking at my donation coin that we used to give to some of our donors, and Sophie and I were talking about this not that long ago. About sometimes as a transplant provider, you want to transplant everybody that crosses your world, but also as a donor, you can help so much. And I love this phrase from Dr. Seuss that says, the world, to the world you may be one person, but to one person you may be the world. And that's the reality of transplant. That you can really make a difference in a lot of people. A single organ donor can help up to nine different or more people. And again, just sharing stories. And again, thank you for the work that you do and that Sophie's doing, because I think it's spreading the word starts with our own communities, right? And sharing with your family. Like for me, it was, very interesting when I started in the field and I was young, and I would go to, Thanksgiving dinner with the family, and most of my family didn't know anything about transplant, and you kind of start promote, and they didn't know I was an organ donor, right? Like, or I want to donate. And we're like, but you're a transplanter. I'm like, no, we all should be. It's kind of almost for me a social responsibility. And I know there's still some barriers that we have to fix, but I think that we have to spread the word with our closest circle first, and then do things like what you guys are doing right now.
Excellent. As it would be so easy to have a much longer conversation. I feel like we've only kind of skimmed over the top of this. We could go twice as long, 3 times as long with just one of you to plumb the depths of kind of all the issues in this. And it's such, truly a joy to have these conversations and learn about your perspectives on this sort of stuff. So I want to thank you both for your time and for your energy and for your commitment, and for, waking up the next day and going for it. I really do appreciate that right now. Sophie, great to see you again as well. Hopefully we'll run into you at a conference coming up soon. And likewise with you, Dr. Rodriguez. I hope we're able to cross paths as well and plan together in the future. So thank you, guys. Actually, Dr. Rodriguez, I know you're involved with a group called Split on pediatric liver transplant. If people are looking for more information on that, where should they go?
Yeah, I think, yes, the Society of Pediatric Liver Transplantation is an amazing group. Our website is tts.split.org, or you can just put Society of Pediatric Liver Transplantation. We have our annual meeting coming up on May 1st, and we have a very, very strong patient and family support group that really is what moves our group, right? Like we all do what we do because of our patients, and so I think anybody that wants to join Split, please look for us.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right, and we are back. Joining me, as usual, for our catch-up after the conversation is producer extraordinaire, Lily Bainig. Lily, thanks for hanging out. That was a pretty remarkable. It's really humbling to be in the presence of 2 people like that, of Sophie and Dr. Rodriguez, who are doing such great work on this sort of stuff. What were your thoughts coming away from that?
Yeah, the connection that they have too after going through that, obviously twice life-changing experiences. It's pretty moving. But I kind of took a step back. They're kind of the actors on stage, but there's a whole backstage crew that enables this to happen, right? You've got the doctors and the patients and the families, but there's the people who coordinate where a liver would go once it's donated, and there's the people who drive the liver from place to place or take it onto a plane or things like that. That I just don't think we think about often, and especially right now when there's so much restructuring and uncertainty happening with our kind of federal administrative system. It's something I hope is preserved and maintained and strengthened, kind of despite some of the uncertainty.
Yeah, we really talk about, at Global Liver, we used to have this catchphrase, if it all starts with a patient. And it really speaks to the patient is at the heart of all of this, but there's an entire ecosystem that goes around this. And there's all these sort of different pathways, I think, that patients end up on, in liver health in general, but specifically in transplant. And we know that transplant is so political, there's so much stuff that's going on there, but there's also this real, emotional pathway, this emotional journey that patients go on. There's, something that patients really have to deal with is the hope that they get a transplant, but at the same point, kind of the distress of actually needing a transplant at that point. And those are real kind of things that kind of run into each other, objects in this. And so, that's part of the work that we do, is trying to make sure that those processes are as smooth as possible in the environment for the political nonsense and the other things that go on as well. Any other thoughts from the conversation?
That's something that I've heard a lot from those who have received a transplant, is kind of well, I'm glad that I had this high MELD score, so I qualified, but obviously that time there was a lot of pain and struggle to life at that point.
Yeah, I mean, you really see that with like folks that are like, they have to get to a certain point to get the transplant, but then at the point once you qualify, you have to, reduce your BMI, make sure you've got good oral health, that your teeth are in the right shape, all these other things that people hadn't really counted on for that. It's such a scientifically interesting process, but again, at the heart of it are patients like Sophie, who are, trying to look for their best days ahead.
Yeah. And I think seeing that connection between Sophie and Dr. Rodriguez really speaks to the importance of a good team, to that patient experience from start to finish.
Yeah. Excellent. So anyway, here we are finishing another episode of Is Your Liver Healthy? I want to throw a special shout out and thanks to Dr. Rodriguez and Sophie for joining us today. It can really be a difficult thing for patients to talk about their journey. But with her transplant, that is, second transplant, that just is mind blowing to me. Sophie is preparing for med school and really has a bright future ahead. Now, make sure you catch up with the latest activities at globalliver.org and be sure to join the conversation on our socials at Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And actually for this month especially, keep an eye out for stories from liver transplant recipients, like you've just heard, throughout the month of April, throughout all of GLI's social media. You'll see the video version of this on YouTube, and we're also available on the latest podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Pod, Pandora, or wherever you are listening. And if you have a question, maybe a suggestion, or even an idea for a topic for a future episode, we'd love to hear from you. Hit us up, healthyliver@globalliver.org. And when you do that, be sure to leave a comment and hit those like and subscribe buttons on your platform of choice so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes and great conversations. It may not seem like much, but this really helps us grow awareness, education, and support for liver patients worldwide. So I'm Jeff McIntyre, and on behalf of producer extraordinaire Lily Bainig and our team at the Global Liver Institute, we'll see you next time. Thanks, y'all.